And my role here really is to help services find funding, to write policies, procedures and strategies to help support victims and their children, but also to try and prevent violence against women and girls happening in the first place. Yeah. We have a huge range of support services in Newcastle upon Tyne, largely funded by the City Council here. We have the only black, minority and ethnic women's refuge that is between Edinburgh and Leeds, with very specific services for women and their children. We also have independent domestic violence advisors who work with high-risk victims of domestic violence. Now that's not just with women from ethnic minority communities, that's all women, whether or not they're from Newcastle, they're white from Newcastle, whether or not they've got disabilities, or whether or not they come from one of our community backgrounds here. So we have a significant range of services, and we do find that women from black, minority, ethnic and refugee backgrounds often come into those services because by the time they ask for help, the risk has escalated to very high risk. And by that, what I mean is they are at risk of being murdered by their partner or by somebody in their extended family. I think some of the differences from women from black, minority, ethnic and refugee backgrounds are it's more difficult for them to access services. I think often, we have to be aware that racism exists and that women and their children are very, very worried about speaking out about violence in the home. They're worried because of issues of honour, it being seen to be disrespectful, or they're worried that they're not going to be believed or get the right services for them. And I think that's why it's really, really important that we do as much as we possibly can to make sure that women do know that services are available for everybody. I think one of the things that I would say is be very cautious about going down a road where we kind of view women from particularly South Asian communities or other backgrounds more at risk of violence and abuse than other women, because violence against women and girls occurs nationally, internationally. It affects every single community, every single nationality, every single religion. It happens right the way across the board. I think women from those communities have differences and barriers, but I do not think that violence is more prevalent in any one community. It is right the way across the board an international problem and issue. Violence against women and girls isn't about culture, it isn't about race, it isn't about poverty, it's more an issue of violence against women and girls. I would say one of the most common forms of abuse and violence that we see is stalking and harassment behaviours and controlling behaviours as well. And I think we're all very focused on violence, but we need to remember that being controlled, being put down, being emotionally abused can have devastating consequences for victims. I think the differences would be to be culturally sensitive when needed, to make sure that women get the right support that's appropriate for them. So, that we routinely make sure that projects supporting women and children are able to access interpreters, and that's interpreters who are not necessarily from that community but might come from outside Newcastle. About making sure that the service users feel that they're represented by the staff members who are working with them. And I think just going back to what I said before about really making sure that women know that projects are available for them and are accessible for them. We've recently just worked with the Police and Crime Commissioner to train over 120 members of staff in a whole range of different organisations to be champions in their organisations. So to take responsibility for making sure that posters are up, staff are trained, staff understand, to be responsive and sensitive around that. We typically train about 800 members of staff across the city a year around all forms of violence and abuse, and that would include forced marriage, honour-based violence, working with male perpetrators of abuse, and also issues in how to protect children as well. Again, what we'd be really wanting to do is work with specialists in those communities, so working with projects like PANA, the Black and Asian Women's Refuge, working with projects like the Angelou Centre, and there are a number of other projects as well that we also do some work with to make sure that we're getting it right for those communities. Northumbria Police and police forces generally take domestic violence and abuse and violence against women and girls much more seriously now than they've ever done before. I can certainly, I've been in this job for 8 years, and I can see a huge difference in the ways that particularly the criminal justice agencies respond to victims. I think that we've got better about trying to get support to victims who are high risk and preventing homicides from occurring as well. And I think we've got much more understanding now of how abuse affects young women and, you know, girls of 14, 15 and 16 who might be being abused by their partners, boyfriends. I think we've got a lot better at recognising that.